Welcome to the EchoCast. I am Bon, and this is a podcast talking about all of the news, reviews, and speculation around video games on all platforms and almost every genre. This week we will be talking about Xbox news, No Man's Sky continuing, Halo Infinite's underwhelming Season 2, Mass Effect stuff, The Division rankings, rantings, and much more. First, please subscribe to my YouTube channel for more podcasts and other videos. Follow the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or your favorite podcast provider. And last but not least, join the Discord to chat about the podcast episodes, games in general, or just about anything else that you want. Gaming news. We'll start off with some Xbox. So the big thing I actually want to start off this show with is there wasn't like one big story this week. Maybe I missed some, but it seems like there's no big games coming out like, right now. There haven't been any big like blockbuster bits of news or anything. So this is I named this episode a smattering of news because that's what it is. There's not really anything huge, but there's some fun stuff to talk about. So in the Xbox front, there was a report this week talking about a new chip in development, I assume by AMD, for the Xbox Series X. I've read a few articles about this, and it seems like basically the idea is that it's going to be a processor and maybe GPU. Consoles are weird because you don't really have like a CPU and like a GPU like you do in a PC just in there, because they are they try to make them as small as they can, but still cool well and stuff. There's basically a motherboard in there that has the CPU and all of the components of the GPU and the RAM and all of that stuff, like just like stuck wherever it can go. So there isn't just like a video card. There's components of the video card stuck onto the motherboard. It's interesting. So this report is suggesting that they're creating a new chip that probably is involved in both processes that is potentially smaller, but more efficient, and like so it could, in theory, it would run at least as well as the current Series X, maybe a little better. But it sounds like, from the things I've read, is that the goal is to maybe reduce the size of the Series X, and that this isn't really supposed to be the like mid-gen refresh. So if you remember with the last generation, we had the PS4 Pro came out, I think like 6 months or a year after the Xbox One X came out, which I actually had one of those. And it wasn't technically that much faster than the base Xbox One, but it sure seemed like it. It sure did a lot of stuff that the one didn't do very well. And so this doesn't appear to be that. I've seen a lot of speculation by, I think, like Jeff Grubb and some other people who have really kind of pointed out that there may not really be a mid-gen refresh this time, even though people, even including myself, think that there might be. And the reasoning is that the Xbox One and the PS4, when they released, they used normal CPU like normal computer architecture, whereas the 360 and the PS3 did not. But they used what was essentially like a laptop hardware. I guess there were issues, like they just basically didn't have the tech at the time to make such a small console that could cool itself appropriately, using like full size like desktop components. And so they essentially used like lower power components that were more akin to like a laptop than a full desktop experience. And so the reason that the PS4 Pro and the One X were kind of a big deal is because they were pretty underpowered from day one. Where now we jump ahead, and now we have the PS5 and the Series X, and the S to a point, that are pretty good, like are competitive with, moderately equipped gaming PCs right now, like today. The the current gen, the new systems are in so much better of a spot when it comes to hardware capability when they released and today than the last gen was at the same time in their life. So I've seen that argument that, like, we may not get a PS5 Pro, or we may not get a Xbox One X Elite, whatever they would call it, because their naming conventions are a little wacky, to say the least. I still think we will. There's a listener question that I'll cover my thoughts on this a little bit more. But I don't know if we'll see a true next generation, at least from Xbox. I'm sure there will be a PS6. I have no doubt. I don't necessarily know if we're going to see Xbox do like a next gen. I would think it's way more likely that maybe after like 5 or 6 years, we'll see them release essentially just like a new Xbox, but that's still like in the series family, or it may not necessarily be hyped as like this big new thing. It just may be hyped as a big update. But we'll talk about this more during the listener questions from Master Prime. So this is interesting. It was really interesting when I saw some coverage of this news, because I saw some commentators being like, oh yeah, that Series X is a chunky boy. I'm like, it's really not. Its footprint is really small. It's not that tall. It's a pretty small device. Mine is under my desk, sitting on top of my subwoofer. So it's not that big. It's a small subwoofer. And which is funny, if there's I have to imagine PlayStation is working on like a PS5 Slim, because that thing is hilarious. It's obviously a good system, and I'm not into all the console war stuff, but like I don't want to hear someone call the Series X a chunky boy and then like look at this like floor fan looking device that is a console and is just hilariously huge. So I'm really curious if I have to imagine they have to be working on something similar, but we'll have to wait and see. The second story I dug up today was some Cyberpunk updates and just CDPR updates in general. So a time, a timeline or a content delivery schedule was released from CDPR involving Cyberpunk recently. We did just recently hear that they've begun development on the next Witcher game and the Unreal 5 engine, and dropping their own engine, which Cyberpunk is on. And I believe it's called the Red engine. I know, very original. But in this timeline, they announced that the first DLC won't come for Cyberpunk until 2023, next year, and that's interesting. Now, in the most concerning part about it, I guess to me, is that they have not hit their mark on anything when it comes to timeframes. So if they say like early 2023, which I don't know if they did, but I would expect it in late 2023, which you're taking a game that had a really rough launch, not just because of the old gen systems. The game today has issues, and it's not even just performance. Seems like they've figured most of that out. It's a mile wide and an inch deep. The game isn't what they advertised. It's just not. my experience with it, and from what I've gathered, is if it was just like a more linear single player game, it probably would have been really highly regarded. But instead, they just tried to do too much, and they overpromised and underdelivered. And to say that they aren't going to have any of this DLC out until next year, so it's putting it 2-3 years after the game came out. That's interesting. That's if I was a betting man, I would put money on that DLC never seeing the light of day. What do I know? Of course. So, we'll have to wait and see about that. I hope it comes out. There's obviously, the game sold great. I think they said it crossed like 14 million sold or something. I think it really sucks that a game that was released like that and that had the messaging it had. To me, it's a bummer that they weren't like punished more for the way they've handled that game. I think it sucks that they've basically just gotten a free pass, and that people will remember, but they won't care. And not enough people will learn a lesson from trusting them. And the next Witcher game will be getting back into their lane, right? So it will probably be better, even though Witcher 3 had issues when it released too. I don't know. And speaking of Witcher 3, there was supposed to be a big remaster for the current gen systems that was being developed, done by a third-party studio outside of CDPR, and they've essentially taken that project away and are doing it in-house. But that also means that it's indefinitely delayed. So if you were looking forward to playing The Witcher 3 in 4K 60 FPS or whatever, you're going to be waiting a while, unless of course you're on PC, I guess. But I don't know. They have a lot on their plate. They're still working on Cyberpunk. They're working on this new Witcher game on a whole new engine. They are doing this now. They're doing a remaster of Witcher 3. I know they've got a bunch of other side projects going on. Interesting things with Cyberpunk. Very curious to how that works out in the long run for them. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. We're also going to keep an eye on No Man's Sky. They just released their new Outlaws update. And this game is wild. So I was actually one of the fools who pre-ordered No Man's Sky back in 2016, I believe, is when it initially released. And if 2016 was really a reckoning for video games. Not to say that it's all been fixed now, right? But 2016 was interesting. There were a bunch of games that came out that promised a lot and didn't deliver. Unfortunately, one of them is my beloved Division 1. While that ended up being a pretty good game, it seemed like it was going to be a different game leading up to release, especially in its early marketing. And then we had No Man's Sky, which was the first game by this Hello Game Studio, and their CEO, their creator was all over the place, and people would basically be like, "So is this game gonna have this?" And he'd be like, "Sure." Like, yeah, we'll do that. And I think it was a really good example of a developer who just happened to own the whole company needing PR training badly. Because in hindsight, what it seems like is that he was taking these interviews and he was advertising this game, and when someone would suggest something to him, like, will you be able to find your friends? And he says, like, well, in theory you could, even though when the game came out you could not. That was not a possibility. It seems like he was talking to them like he would like another developer and be like, "Yeah, we can try to do that, sure." And it came, and now maybe he just blatantly lied. It depends on your take on the situation. But this game is so interesting because I've seen people talk about, because probably they came out in the same year, the way that like the Division 1 was recovered and things were added and it was kind of fixed up. And I've seen people like talk about that and No Man's Sky in the same breath of like, oh, these two games came out in rough shape and they really came back. I don't think that you can really compare those two things at this point, because what happened with No Man's Sky is that game came out and it was not what people were expecting. It was kind of bad. It had some cool ideas, but it was not finished. And what they did is they went silent. And I want to say for like 9 months or maybe even almost a year. And then they came back out and they said, they did refunds for people who were upset, all that stuff. And they came out with this big update that basically fixed everything and added a bunch of stuff that people originally expected. And you can only congratulate them so much, right? Because those things were expected when the game released and not months, years later almost. But they did it, and it was a good game at that point, right? But then what they did, and the Division did similar stuff. By Division 1.8, the game was in pretty good shape. It was good. It wasn't everything that they initially sold us on, but it was fine. It was good. But it never like ascended to like greatness. It ascended to good, right? Even though it's one of my favorite games. And what No Man's Sky did is they didn't stop with just fixing their mistakes and getting the game to where it should have been. They've gone nuts, and now they're in the 6th year of that game, and they're releasing this Outlaws update. They've released, I just started playing this game again this week, and I've put in probably 5 or 10 hours, and it's so cool. It's so pretty. It's way overcomplicated. I have no idea what the hell I'm doing, but I'm having fun doing whatever I'm doing. And what's really interesting about No Man's Sky is that they went from a story of a game releasing to a lot of deserved criticism to putting in the work and fixing that game to then ascending beyond that to making their game, in theory, one of the best games you can buy or play. And I mean that, like, to my heart, to my soul. It's a top 10 game right now, easily. And that's a big deal. Maybe it shouldn't have taken 6 years, and it hasn't. I'm under the impression that people, for the most part, have been satisfied with what No Man's Sky is for like 3 or 4 years. Like it's been doing well for a while, and it's cool because it's not just a redemption story, but it's a story of them getting redemption and then keep it on going. They've put in features into this game that people didn't even expect back when the game came out. Like they met those expectations, and then they've just gone further and further. And like, this game is wild. When you play it, you feel like you're a little speck of nothing in the middle of this giant galaxy, and more, this universe, this space. And it's something that I'm trying to learn and I'm trying to stay into, because there's like 3 main storylines that you can go down. There's all this side stuff. You can build on planets and discover new planets. You can mine, you can do missions, you can do PvP, you can do bounties, you can buy freighters, you can just run supplies if you want. This Outlaws update is where you can be a pirate. Like, it's so cool. And it's a game that, like, I can tell I've barely scratched the surface of, and it's such a cool story. And it's exciting. My biggest struggle with playing it is that I'm just too late. I'm so late. It would be like trying to jump into Destiny right now, when you've never played it before. There's just so much shit, so, but I'm giving it an honest try. I'm actually planning on playing it on stream. But it's just cool. I've never had more fun accomplishing basically nothing. And that's a good sign for a game, right? So, yeah. A bad sign for a game is what I think we've been seeing with Halo Infinite in its Season 2 announcement. So this is coming soon, I think later this month. I don't have the date in front of me, but Halo Infinite has had such a weird journey. They kind of shadow dropped the PvP back in November, a while before, a month or so before the single player released. And it had great reception. There were people who put the game into their game of the year talk simply off the PvP. And then the single player came out and it was great. It was I loved it. I really enjoyed that story. It brought back some feels from the old games. It kind of closed up some storylines, opened some new ones up. And it was cool. It was great. It was definitely, for me, my game of the year last year was the Mass Effect Legendary Edition. A lot of people don't count remasters. I do. So suck it. But it was definitely in my top 3 or so, at least. And so since then, things haven't gone great. For people like me who really just want to play the single player, I'm not aware that they haven't at least talked about any plans of DLC or continuing the story. The game, without spoiling anything, ends in a way where they've obviously set it up for more story. Whether we get it or not, we'll have to wait and see. But the multiplayer, I had fun with it. It's great. It plays well. It's enjoyable, but it's just, it gets old. There's not that many maps there. The modes are slowly but surely coming. We still don't have Forge. We still don't have co-op in the single player. And those things, like, they have to come. Forge is going to be a big deal, and I think it got delayed out of the season 2 update. It's not coming till later this year. Same with co-op and the single player. So I've seen people say that they should have delayed this game like another year, if not at least 6 months, putting it out this summer or even at the end of this year, 2022. I don't know. I still think they got the boost they needed during the holiday season from the multiplayer and the single player being cool, before people tired of them and inevitably turned on them. I don't necessarily think the delay would have helped anything. I think the narrative around another delay would have been more damaging than a more finished product would have helped, but I could be wrong. I think there's also a chance that the style of game that Halo is, that was really successful 10 years ago, just may not fit in today's gaming atmosphere. And I think that's a reality we may have to accept. It's going to have a cult following, a decent player base. If they release single player stuff, lots of people will come back. Maybe a decent number come back for new seasons and stuff. But there's a chance that Halo just isn't what it used to be, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be, obviously people would like for it to be a big deal, but it can just be a good game. It doesn't have to be the best game. And I think a lot of people will not agree with that, but that's kind of where I stand with it. I think Halo is a legacy title, and unless they want to completely switch up the formula, which they haven't shown any desire to do yet, I think it just kind of is what it is. Next story here, these next two things. So there's pretty much always going to be like a Mass Effect section of the podcast and a Division part of the podcast. But we're going to hit the Mass Effect one. We actually have like a little bit of news this time. So there was a new BioWare blog that came out this week. This is really cool. As a little bit of a side tangent, I feel like these BioWare blogs drop like every 2 or 3, maybe 4 weeks. And that's a big deal because from what I can tell, this is a fairly new thing for them to be this transparent. As far as I can tell, this is the 3rd blog this year. They did one for New Year's. I think they did another one like a month or a month and a half ago. And then this one just came out. Now, admittedly, I'm not a huge Dragon Age fan. This was it was 90% Dragon Age, if not more. And it has some cool updates. I'm curious about Dragon Age 4. I don't really like Inquisition. I can't get into it. I'm curious to what this next one's going to look like. If anything, I'm just curious to see what kind of product BioWare can put out in 2023, which is when it's expected to drop. So I'm following it mostly because I'm curious to what the implications will be for Mass Effect, the next one, which they did mention very briefly in this blog. But there was lots of conversation anyways. So the exact quote from the blog about Mass Effect was, "There's also the next game in the Mass Effect universe, which is now in early development. It's going to be a while before we can talk about it in more detail, but we can't wait to show you what we're working on." And so, pretty simple. They're obviously not, showing their cards much because there's probably not much to show at this point. The last blog they did was, I believe, the blog that went into basically outlining how game development works in the different stages in game development. Again, that one I think mostly focused on Dragon Age 4, but it actually mentioned the new Mass Effect in a fairly big way. And from what I remember, it was basically suggesting that the current Mass Effect is in the pre-production conceptual stages of development. So what happened when this blog came out is that a few fans latched onto this, which is now in early development, and took that as, oh wow, they're working on the game, they're in. So again, a quick recap. Basically, games are in concept and pre-production, and that's when they are figuring out what they're going to do, and the mechanics and the story and the script, they're basically doing all the hard work. And then when that's done, they leave pre-production, go into full production, and that's when they basically have a blueprint for how they want to make the game and what the game is going to be, and that's a small team, a small-ish team who does that. And then when they go into full production, that's when they bring in the hundreds of animators, environment creators, engine people, all this stuff, where then all of those people have a blueprint of, okay, I need to make this world, I need to make this weapon, I need to make this model, I need to make, we need to record this VO, we need to do this and that and the other. And so my impression is that this statement about early development is that they're still in pre-production. Obviously people are going to take this however they want and whatever, comforts their ego. I am going to assume they're still in relatively early pre-production. And the rumor has been for a long time, and it seems pretty reasonable, that they can't, or that they basically can't start full production until Dragon Age 4 ships, because all of the people that the next Mass Effect game are going to use, or at least a lot of them, they could have a small team actively working on stuff, but not their full production, right? And they're going to need those hundreds of people to shift over to Mass Effect to make all these worlds and ships and characters and whatever they're going to do. And so I'm going to stay steadfast in that they're going to be in pre-production for the next year and a half. And then when Dragon Age 4 drops and they have the availability of all of this new production resource, all these people who now don't have a thing to do, that's when we'll hear about them actually getting into production. It wouldn't surprise me if N7 Day in 2023 we see some big update where they're like, okay, we're going full force, we're on this thing and we're killing it, and we're working on it. Here's some concept art, here's some models that we're making, here's some early game footage, and that's when even this year I'm not expecting to see much. I wouldn't be surprised if this N7 Day in November we get some kind of more direct confirmation of when the game's going to take place, who's going to be in it, maybe a confirmation if we're going to be Shep again or not, or if there is going to be a Shep, or if it's going to be so far in the future that Shep's dead and we have a new start. We'll have to wait and see. Another little bit is that today, I'm recording this on Friday, they did release, BioWare tweeted out there are some new job openings. I'm keeping an active list of job openings that we know are for Mass Effect. And I was able to add one more job to that list. It was a lead engine programmer. On their website, it doesn't list this as a Mass Effect job specifically, but on this Twitter post, it it said it was for Mass Effect, and it was posted all the way back in last September. So this is an old job listing. The one note that I did notice when I went through all the job listings is that so another reason I think they're still in pre-production is they have 5 director positions. This is technical director, environmental, gameplay, level design, narrative, and studio tech directors. All of those jobs are open right now for Mass Effect. So I find it really hard to believe that they would have entered full production without, all of those extremely important jobs still available. The note I have is that there was a job for the presentation director, and that job listing is no longer there. So I would be willing to bet that they have filled that position, which is cool. That's progress. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if a bunch of these positions are filled and they just haven't taken down the listing, or if they know who's going to take it. There's, I would say, a decent chance that there's people currently working on Dragon Age 4 that once that ships, they will take over some of these positions, or when they're no longer needed in the stages of development for Dragon Age, they'll switch over. It wouldn't surprise me if that happens. But the video game market is also booming right now, and it's probably gonna be hard for them to fill these jobs if they're looking to do it externally. So we'll have to kind of wait and see what happens there. But yeah, I think we're still in pre-production. The last bit I have is last week we talked about the Unreal Engine 5 releasing, and already there's been some fan concept stuff for the next Mass Effect, and someone kind of recreated or to a point recreated Omega, which is featured pretty heavily in Mass Effect 2, and is featured a little bit in 3 in a DLC. But I wasn't super impressed with this demo, to be totally honest. It was a big hit with all of the Mass Effect fans, but I kind of didn't think it looked that great. But it's still showing, I suspect by the end of the year, I wouldn't be surprised if there's people doing stuff in Unreal Engine 5 on a fan perspective that's going to give us a really good idea of what we could see from the next game. So, I'll keep an eye out for that. Okay, we're going to move into our final topic today, and that's the Division 2. Some news about that. So we have the Phase 2 of Title Update 15 release on Thursday, and so you can get in there and play that. I for full disclosure, I haven't played much of it. They seems like they may have fixed an issue where every time you finish the new mode countdown, you would get your session could end, which for me, as someone who doesn't have Warlords on PC, means that I would have to delete my character and start a new one in order to play again. I think they've fixed that, but for me, if you don't have Warlords, you still can't easily test this PTS. Every time you leave a session, that character gets locked and you have to delete them and start a new one. So that's a bummer. I don't, they today the official Division account put out this blog that was explaining why they don't do a console PTS, and there seems to be, and I'm sure there's a lot of players who weren't around for the Division 1 PTS test they did, or who simply don't understand why the console is a challenge to do a PTS, which it is 100%. The thing is that I read through this blog and it explains things okay. It explains that they tried it in Division 1 and it didn't work very well. I think they did a really bad job allocating the spots. I think I thought it was kind of weird that in this blog they didn't kind of own the fact that I think the biggest problem with the PTS on console was I don't think they did it very well. I think it was not handled very well. One of the things too is they said that like if they do it on PC, they can use their own launcher and they can update it as many times as they want, and it's easy. On consoles, they have to get the builds approved, and and that's a problem. The thing they didn't mention is that I'm also pretty sure it cost a lot of money for them to get the approval and to put new like updates on the consoles, and so I'm sure this is a financial thing as well. um I did think one comment in the blog was kind of funny, where it was like, well, when we did it in Division 1, we didn't get very much feedback. And so it didn't seem worth it. That's because I think there were only like a couple hundred people who got picked for the PTS, and the PTS was a shit show on console. And so they probably had 5% of the people even able to do the PTS on console compared to PC. And it wasn't handled very well. And so, yeah, they probably didn't get much feedback because not that many people were probably able to do it. So I don't know. I felt like this blog was informative. I think it is good for people who truly don't understand why the PTS isn't on console. Um, I also think it was a little, I don't like pretentious or condescending, or I just, I wish it seemed like they were being like completely transparent about why they don't do it, instead of just telling us kind of the same things we've heard over the years about it. I think there's more to it than what they have explained. But it's stuff like, spending time working on it. And a big complaint from them was back to that issue with, getting the updates approved, is that they said, well, in the time frame, we can only get one build of the PTS on console, where we can do like 3 phases like they're doing right now. And I guess my thought is like, I mean, one's better than 0. Like, I think that you can still gain valuable, feedback if you can have enough people. Because a big thing they said is that there's something to do with that they can only have so many people do the PTS on console. That was a big issue in Division 1 when they did it. I don't know this for a fact, but I am willing to bet that that is up to them how many people do it. And it's a money thing. I'm sure it's, if they wanted 5,000 people to test it on console, it probably costs a lot of money, where they don't have to pay that money on, Ubisoft Connect. And so it's like, I don't know. I didn't love that article. I think that there's a attitude that every single person who doesn't understand why they aren't doing it on console just doesn't understand those things. And I don't think that's the case. Like, I know why they aren't doing it on console, but I still think it sucks. And I think that there's kind of a dismissive attitude towards console players. And then I specifically am annoyed by it because they make it, like I said about this Warlords thing. I have Division 2 on PC. I've played it for like 5 hours. I just don't like playing it on PC. And I don't have Warlords, and I don't want to spend $30 to do a PTS. But I did buy Warlords in the game, and probably tens of hundreds of dollars of other stuff on my console character. So I really wish there was a way for me to like show like, yeah, I do own the game and Warlords. I would like to be able to test it on PC. But they don't have that ability, or they won't do it. So from what I have seen, this update just continues to feel a lot like it's going to be a thing where like people who were playing the game anyway still are going to enjoy it, because there's going to be some new stuff, some new gear, some new guns. People who haven't played in a while, it seems like enough that you may pop back in and be like, oh, okay, what's this? And play Countdown a handful of times and, check out some of this new gear. And that's probably it. I don't think this update is going to be a thing where it's like Warlords or 1.8 for Division 2, where it's like, it's the big comeback. Like, okay, everyone, here's a bunch of cool new shit. Come play our game again. I think instead it's going to be kind of like, here's an update and here's some stuff. And if you are interested, here you go. And that's kind of a bummer, because I've said it and I won't keep repeating it every time, but this update would have been perfect like 9 months ago. After the Fae season ended and there was a little bit of a lull, I think that would have been cool. And putting it out, next month or the month after is probably like a year too late. And that's fine. I mean, I appreciate the hard work. I appreciate what they're doing, but like, like early 2021, after most of the Division 2 team had been moved to Star Wars, and there was this debate, within, the upper echelons of Ubisoft of like, okay, like, are we done with Division 2 or do we want more content? And, they eventually made the decision for more content, which led to them, Yannick and Trick and these people, putting together this new team and working with people at Bucharest and maybe some other studios. I just find it really hard to believe that like Countdown and this other content that's coming out was this like master plan where they burst into the meeting room at Ubisoft, and when they were deciding should we have more content or not, and they said, Countdown and this gear set, if you let us keep working on this game, this is what we're gonna do. And Yves Guillemot falls over in his chair, and all of the executives are like, oh my god, that's amazing, you have to keep making this game. I find it hard to believe that what we're getting is what sold them on making, letting them make more Division 2 stuff. I suspect it was basically like, Warlords sold really well and a lot of people played it, and there's still more people playing than you think, so we should do more stuff. And that's just like, it just feels like too little too late. And it's and I'm curious about how it's going to play out in the long run. I saw some people talking like, this seems like not enough content for them to bring this, to restart development. I think we're seeing the restart of development of Division 2. I think that we're going to see a year or two, or maybe even more years of development on this game, and we may eventually get some really cool things and things that seem more fitting of the moment and stuff. Maybe. It's just, it's probably going to be a while. They are hiring. They're hiring quite a few positions at Massive for Division 2. So it seems like that they're trying to ramp back up in a pretty significant way. I just wonder if like when they finally get there, and if they put out like a Warlords, type update, like, will people still be around? There's also a possibility that they may be planning on doing like a year or two of content for Division 2, and they're going to build this team up to be like a pre-production team for a Division 3. I could see that. That would be a thing where like I wouldn't expect that to take any fruition. I mean, I don't think we're going to, if a Division 3 happens, 2026 would be a date I would throw out there. It's not coming anytime soon. So I don't know. I wish I was more excited about what's happening. I don't think what's happening is bad. I just think it's fine. Spoiler alert, I won't reveal any of the stuff, but I did post about this on Twitter. During the phase 1 PTS, the same person who data mined all of the other seasons over on Reddit data mined this next season, season 9, from the phase 1 files, and basically revealed a bunch of information about the story of what they're going to be showing us. They did have some discretion. They kind of withheld themselves a bunch of information and just kind of laid out some general story beats that we're going to be hitting. Again, I won't talk about it here. You can look it up if you want. I don't want to spoil it for anyone. They described it as that they held back a lot of the really big events, which they did in the previous leaks that they did as well, which is cool. So that's out there. From what I saw, it's interesting. I'm curious to how it plays out. It's definitely enticing enough that I plan on playing. Like I want to at least experience all of this stuff that's happening. So I'm interested. I'm not going to be no-lifing Division 2 again from what I've seen so far, but I'll definitely be putting in a few hours a week to do this stuff. So that is genuinely exciting. And then kind of the last thing, I won't rant about this too much because I've talked about it a lot in the past, but through Twitter's wonderful algorithm, I've seen a lot of chatter, that predictably the PvP players are upset that they're basically kind of getting shafted in a lot of ways. My stance on that whole situation is that genuinely I feel bad for people who came into the Division franchise really wanting this PvP experience. They did kind of try to sell us before the first game came out, this idea of the dark zone, and even later on, like things like conflict and stuff. And then when Division 2 came out, they really sold us on like, yeah, Red Storm is like doing this conflict mode, and it's gonna have like events and new modes and all this stuff, and yeah, we're gonna have these 3DZs, and there's gonna be all this stuff we can do with it. And then like Red Storm bounced from the game like a couple months after it came out, and conflict was just ignored, and the DZs have just been ignored. Essentially, they did some fairly significant changes that arguably didn't really make anything that much better, just different. I am perfectly happy to jump onto the train of people saying like, oh, Division 1 PvP was better than 2. The 1 DZ was better. I agree overall. I think the 3 DZs had more potential, but that was not met even close. I think Division 2's conflict mode had so much potential to be such a important, like really cool and like active mode, probably on the level of like Destiny's PvP, if it had gotten love. But now we know that not long after the game came out, Red Storm split off and started working on Heartland, what would become Heartland, and we got left with a bunch of unfinished PvP. And so I genuinely feel for the people who like that is a thing they wanted. My issue comes in that, this is all just off the top of my head, it is from a lot of experience though, in this community and around this game and stuff like that, is that if I didn't feel like, especially the creators who are like PvP focused, but just the general PvP community, if I didn't feel like they were responsible for like 95% of the toxicity and the, lies about stuff, whether it's content related or devs or stuff like that, breaking NDAs, or straight up lying about NDAs. That was my favorite one with Warlords. There was a creator who, I don't know if they're still doing stuff or not, who made a fake NDA email and made a bunch of content using it, and then basically was proven completely wrong by the Division itself. But also, like, I called it out too, of being like, that's not real. I've signed a bunch of NDAs. That is not an NDA. Like, I know what they look like. I'm under like 6 of them right now, with the Division in that realm. And so like, I would feel a lot worse for these people if their behavior wasn't so awful. And if like, I think the hardest part for me, where the empathy is really hard, or the sympathy, whatever, is that like for 6 years, I think Massive has made it pretty clear how much they take PvP seriously. And that they don't like that's not a goal for them. It's either not an interest or not a thing that they feel like they are good at or whatever. And that's why it was always Red Storm's thing. But then obviously Red Storm isn't working on it, and they haven't in multiple years at this point. And it's just, to me, like, there comes a point where like the people who are still expecting the Division to be a PvP game, like at some point, like, you can't feel bad anymore. You just have to be like, hey, like, open your eyes. Like you need to realize that that's not happening. That's not going to happen. Like, that's not what's happening here. And this update should be another nail in the coffin of like, hey, like, guys, if you want to keep playing it, then that's great. Like, but it seems like they all hate it. It's so confusing that like, it seems like, they all harp on it and they all focus on it so much. And I see, like, I saw a post today where they tagged like 10 of the expected people, and we're like, we need to make our voices heard and they need to do better with PvP. And I'm like, come on, like you gotta like start putting the puzzle pieces together. And maybe Massive just needs to come out and be like, yeah, we don't like PvP, we're not gonna do anything. They're not gonna do that because they don't want to deal with that. But like, and it seems like they are doing small things for PvP, but like, it's so hard to feel bad for these people. One, because of the way a lot of them act, especially the most well-known ones, but then also because it just seems like they just like are putting these blinders on and it seems like they hate the game, but they still want it to be exactly what they want, and then they'll love it. They won't, even if Massive made PvP exactly the way these people want it to be, they would still hate it. Like, it's just, that's a whole different discussion. But like, this genre just isn't PvP oriented. You know, Destiny is the only game in this genre whose PvP is like moderately successful, and that's because, you know, they don't have a Dark Zone equivalent, because you can't make that good. It's just, you know, unless you put some crazy, you know, rails on it, you just, the DZ is such a cool idea that is just impossible to execute. And then like Conflict, I think had, like I said, I think it had a chance to be like equivalent to Destiny's PvP, where like some people like it, most people tolerate it, and it's like okay. And it's just not, that's just not how it is in the Division. And it's just, it's frustrating, one, because I think it gets so much, there's so much loudness around it from so few people. And I guess the last point I'll make about it is that the simple fact is that the developers, especially when it seems like they're fairly limited on what they can do with the Division, it seems like Ubisoft just doesn't let them go all in. And so what they'll do is they'll work on the stuff, and they'll put out stuff that, according to their numbers and their stats, will have the most interaction and please the most people. And so, especially with Division 2 and even Division 1, for the most part, you have to realize that like it seems about like 85-90% of their effort has gone towards PvE stuff, not PvP. And I've been told, I can't prove it because I would get people in trouble, and I don't even know if I could find the info anymore, but for Division 1 and 2, at peak for active player base, when the player bases were high, shortly after release, shortly after updates, maybe 5% of the active community was playing PvP. It's not as popular as the people who love it think it is. And then they get confused why they don't invest in it, and it's because no one's doing it. And so like, it's a tough subject, and a part of me does feel bad. Like, if I put myself in the shoes of someone who wants Division PvP to be good, I would have left the game by now. I don't understand why you would still be around, but if you're that dedicated, or you just enjoy paying that much, I understand the frustration. But like, you gotta read the writing eventually, and I think that's not gonna happen. So now a lot of people think the savior of this is going to be Heartland, which we've essentially heard nothing about in months, maybe over a year officially, besides some leaked stuff that wasn't supposed to come out. And I have to be very careful about what I talk about with Heartland for various reasons. But I think it's okay to say that there should be emails going out to people who signed up to test it, just general public people. So check your emails, check your promo folders, check your junk mail. If you signed up to test Heartland, check your emails. So it seems like something is moving. And then the other thing is that there's been this Twitter account. There's actually two of them. It seemed like they're run by the same person, that are essentially, so they make it very clear in their description that is a school project. I don't really understand. I'm not going to say the names of the accounts. Honestly, I don't know what they are off the top of my head, and I don't want to push any more people towards them. But in their description, they're like, this is a school project. And I'm like, okay, whatever. But knowing that most people don't look at the descriptions, they look at the tweet, they look at the picture, and they look at the name of the account. And in this particular case, it's like the Division Heartland. They have the Heartland symbol, and they have been posting all this cryptic bullshit about like, oh, like posting this date and then posting these pictures. And it's like, they're obviously playing on people who don't pay very good attention, and, you know, don't pay attention to the fact that this is clearly a fake account. And so just be careful. There is no official information out right now about Heartland. If you see people posting tweets or retweeting stuff or whatever, making videos probably about these tweets, because even a lot of the creators are too dull to do any research and, you know, prove anything. There is no official information today. and I think that we'll probably see something soon. I wouldn't be surprised if Ubisoft does a forward sooner than later. Um, I don't know. We will wait and see, but be careful what information you latch onto. Okay, we're gonna start wrapping this show up because I've been talking for almost an hour already. Listener questions. They are both from Discord this week. The first one is from Scotty VT4, and they say, "Would you like to see someone else acquire Massive? If so, who do you think would be best suited to take them over? Probably anyone. If you want me to be totally honest, it seems like, and I've talked about this quite a bit, so I won't harp on it too much. I highly, 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 highly suggest, if you care about Massive and the Division, and if you're curious about how things work behind the scenes, buy David Polfeld's book. It's called The Dream Architects. And like the first half of the book, you probably won't care about. It's still an interesting read to see how a lot of the older people in games right now got into developing games, because the people getting into development now went to school for game development and did internships and this stuff. These older folks who are making games, who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, they were like I think David Polfeld did advertising in programming. He was interested in programming or something. I have to read it again to remember, but the first half of the book is interesting in general if you care about games. The second half is interesting if you are interested in why the Division seems like it's kind of the, forgive the phrase, but the redheaded stepchild of Ubisoft's lineup, where it seems like they're kind of willing to let them try to make the game initially and then just cut off all support for it afterwards. Long story short, what you'll find from the book is that most of the upper people, and specifically the person who deals with organizing the studios, didn't want Massive. Massive was in a bunch of financial trouble. The guy who started Massive wanted to retire, and he was done. They had made some things and done well, Ground Control and some games like that they had done. But Massive wasn't in good shape. It was in some trouble. It needed help. And this was around when they started prototyping the Division, before Ubisoft bought them. And they got purchased by Ubisoft when some people were on vacation who didn't want Massive. And it definitely seems like, and then shortly after that, I believe the guy who started the company left. David Polfeld took over, who he recently left as well. And long story short, it seems like David Polfeld was not looked upon very kindly by some of the upper people at Ubisoft. I believe there were words mentioned of thinking he's a diva and stuff like that. And so I kind of wonder that now that Ubisoft was able to put their own guy, they hired a guy who used to run a movie studio or something, runs the Massive studio now. And I wonder if maybe they'll get a little bit more love from Ubisoft. Massive is currently running, developing the two biggest, licensed properties, arguably in games. Massive is developing a Star Wars game and has for a long time been working on this Avatar game with James Cameron directly, with his studio. Those are two huge, even if you don't like Star Wars or don't like Avatar, those are two huge licensed products for one studio to be working on. Especially a studio who Ubisoft seems to have not allowed to go all in on their own extremely successful franchise, The Division. So my answer is, honestly, I wouldn't even want to see them acquired. I would love to see them do a Destiny or a Bungie thing where they can take their IP and go just make it and just do it. In today's world, that's not very realistic. It's not even realistic for Bungie because they've been owned by Microsoft and then Activision, and now they're owned by Sony. So obviously, even for a wildly successful studio and publisher like Bungie, and a wildly successful game like Destiny, they can't even make ends meet on their own. And so my dream of Massive being an independent studio is probably dashed. The biggest issue as well is that when Ubisoft bought Red Storm and acquired the Tom Clancy rights, um, even though I believe the basic concept of the Division was being developed before they were acquired, the way that the Massive acquirement happened is they essentially shut down the old Massive and started a new studio called Massive. And that meant that like they don't own any of their own IP. And I highly doubt they would be able to buy it, or anyone else would. So that Tom Clancy name, man, Ubisoft loves it, and they will stick it on almost anything. So who would I like to see him get bought by? Almost anyone. I mean, Microsoft would be my personal love, but they aren't just going to buy Massive. They would buy all of Ubisoft. And, you know, the only way that's going to happen is if the Guillemot family wants to get out of the business, which they may. They aren't young. It is still a family-owned business, if you don't know. And I'm sure they would love to retire sooner than later. So I could see maybe that happening, but I mean, that stuff gets messy. You don't know what studios are going to get shut down, what projects are going to get cut. I don't know. And I don't really want to see the Division become a platform exclusive either. I think that's a good game to be a good third party for everyone. So I don't know. It's a good question though. Thank you, Scotty. And then Master Prime with the last questions here. The first one here is referencing what I talked about before with Xbox at the start of the show. Will console gaming ever disappear? My answer is no, not really, but kind of. I think Xbox is already doing this, and this is why I mentioned before. I think Xbox is going to stop thinking in terms of like generations. And I think Xbox is going to just start releasing consoles as basically like all-in-one computers, that are specifically for gaming. So what I mean is like when Sony puts out their PS6, because I think Sony is going to stay in that mindset of like, we do generations, even though that's become kind of a meme now because they said that we do generations with our games, and now all of their games have been cross-gen. That's a whole different conversation. I think Sony's going to stick with the idea of like the PS6 is our next generation of gaming. I think Xbox is going to start going into, every 3 or 4 years they release a bumped up version of their console. And it essentially will become a thing of like, you want to upgrade? Cool. You want to keep playing your one from a few years ago? It's still fine. And so like it may be a thing where people upgrade like every 2 releases. Like maybe I get the Series X, I don't get the next one in 2 or 3 years, but then the one 2 or 3 years after that I will, because my old one's getting outdated. So I don't think console gaming in the sense of a box that you can hook up to your TV and just play is going to go away. I think the way that it gets like marketed will change. There's also a chance that streaming may take over more eventually. I still think that, at least in the United States, but I think just with tech in general, there's a lot more issues with eventually getting like zero latency streaming ever. I think that there's just some big infrastructure things are going to have to change in the whole world for that to make sense. And I don't see that happening anytime soon. I think that in-home hardware will have a place a lot longer than people think. And then Master Prime's second question here is, are the Xbox Series X and S and PS5 powerful enough to be less cloud dependent? So this is specifically citing, I think, something I've talked about with like the Division. The Division, the way the game works, offloads a lot of its calculations to the server. So like in the Division, there's multiple things being done by the server, like enemy AI, which is a pretty big part of the game, as well as a bunch of other stuff. And the reason they did that was because the last generation of consoles basically just couldn't handle doing that stuff and showing the graphics and doing the physics and doing all of the stuff that, it does. And so they had to offload a bunch of that work to the server. And it's pretty good. I think it's pretty solid. I think it's pretty impressive tech. And so it's kind of a question of if that's... So when games start coming out just for these current gen systems, when they stop being cross-gen, is that going to stop? Probably not. And honestly, like with Ubisoft, they announced that new whatever whatever it was that Stockholm is doing. It almost seems like they're diving even further into it. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all if they try to complement the more powerful new systems by continuing to do this, which kind of makes sense, because then you can take advantage of even more of the power of these new systems to do even more impressive visuals and things like that, and still let the server handle AI and other stuff. The downside is what people have been talking about for a long time. One day, the servers for Division 1 will shut down. It's probably a long ways off. Ubisoft genuinely does a good job of keeping these games going, but they will shut down one day. And when that happens, the Division 1 will be unplayable. You will not be able to play it. And I've seen people be like, well, maybe they can release a patch where you can run the server on your... It's not going to happen. They are not going to do that. The only thing I can think of is that maybe they'd be able to find a solution that would let them run like a virtual server and let you keep playing. But then I don't know if co-op, like, I suspect that one day Division 1 will just shut down and you will never be able to play it again. Whereas right now, you can pull out your Super Nintendo and play Mario, and you'll be able to do that 50 years from now with the right adapters and stuff, right? And that will not be the case. You will not be able to play Division 1 in 50 years. Simple. It's as simple as that. And there's a lot of games that are going to be like that. People need to realize that the reason I am such a big fan of Xbox and stuff is because they seem to have a genuine dedication to preserving games. And because in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, a lot of games that you love today or that you've loved in the last 10 years will be unplayable. You will not be able to play them. You will not be able to play them. And so, the way people go back and play, Super Nintendo and Sega and all these games now, because they just work, because they're just a cartridge in a box, that will not be the case in 15 or 20 years, probably, with a lot of games. So, yeah, I think the cloud integration and stuff like that is here to stay in some capacities, until publishers decide they don't want co-op games and games that are always connected, until they really are okay with just doing some single player games. I don't know if that's going to happen. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. You can post questions on either Twitter page for either the EchoCast or myself, Bond Diesel. You can post in the Discord. You can post on the YouTube comments. You can do all kinds of stuff. So if you want to ask, I'd love to answer. Do it in those places. For content updates, I am basically just really busy right now. We've had basically over the last month and a half, I hurt my back really bad. I was sick. The people who watch our daughter while we work were unavailable. My wife is currently on spring break, and then she has summer break coming up soon, and we're just busy. And so streaming, stuff like that is tough. I'm recording this podcast at 1 a.m. because this is when I had time to do it. And so, be patient. I am trying to keep this stuff going. I'm having a lot of fun. The podcast is growing for the first time since I stopped doing Division only content, which is exciting. Now, it's probably because the Division has more content coming, but I've really enjoyed having a broader focus, and it's cool to see that paying off. So if you listen, thank you very much. Please continue to do so. And that's where we're going to start to wrap this one up. So thank you so much for checking out the podcast. If you want more, be sure to like the video if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel or to the podcast on any platform. Be notified about new videos by hitting the bell on YouTube, including Mass Effect videos, Division videos, anything else that I'm checking out or reviewing, and maybe check out some of my other content on there. You can find me all over the internet as Bond Diesel, including on Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch. You can find the EchoCast official Twitter account. It's at the EchoCast. Very original. And please check out my EchoCast and Bond Diesel merch at the link below. You can also check it out on my Twitter. It's a Streamlabs merch store. I've reduced the prices as much as I can. It's cool stuff. And that's all I have. So until next time.